Okay, there's one work group that is continuing to work, which I guess is what work groups do. But we're going to go ahead and get started, and they will join. We are going to close the meeting with a reflective discussion based on reflections from three eminent panelists, Leslie McIntosh, Doug Van Houweling, and Peter Embi from your right to left. And they will speak in that order. Each of them will speak from their experience at the meeting, their greater professional and life experience, and perhaps also from what the results of the mobile phone polling revealed. So with no further ado, Leslie, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me. So what I thought I would do is start off with just a recap of what we've seen and heard over the last 2 days, and then we're going to get some more deeper thought from these wonderful gentlemen. So I think Chuck started us off yesterday and said, when you publish your paper, you ain't done. So that started it. Going to knowledge is computable, and then Rachel took us to, if we could open the pipes of knowledge, we could imagine a wealth of applications, and then ask the audience really who's here, and there were a lot of hands until she said who's interested in policy, and then there was an awkward silence. And then we had Dr. Patty Brennan come up and give a great keynote, giving us really the overview of what the NLM is doing. Don't forget there's a U54 mechanism about building repositories and utilities that will be coming out in September. And that we're also very behind because of how many citations that are in PMC a year. Then she also said that we need to find something besides GitHub, and because I like that, I'm quoting her on that one. MCBK use panel. This is where Nancy Lorenzi unfortunately was not able to make it, but Rachel filled in. We had an example of user scenarios of Maria and the asthma care. Was it too simplistic? Was it just right? Public health, Sean Granis talked about chlamydia and his 100% sensitivity, or I think it was something about that. And then education, Anderson came up and was really talking about knowledge support tools for evidence and how that could be built in. And Jenny Larkin finished us up with reproducibility as a cornerstone of science and really talked and brought that home. We also then had Jerry and Nancy, Jerry Perry talking about really the need for trust to be built in. Not a lot of questions on that, which there weren't any awkward questions on that, so that was a good thing, but it was really something that we should be thinking about. And then Nancy describing the LHS journal and the ability to submit different things such as knowledge artifacts, which is incredibly exciting. And then day 2 started with some of us getting a little panicked because our luggage was gone, and it got moved, so thank you for announcing where that went. And then a focus on the societies and organizations rather than directly, talking directly with members with our wonderful keynote this morning and bringing joy back to practice. And also talking about, or that was actually before the keynote, but talking about differentiating MCBK from other movements, which it sounds like people are still in the working groups talking about this and doing that. Then we had Dr. Rucker. One of the things I took away from that is just the profound thought about no computable knowledge about price. I don't know, it was just something that struck me that I had never thought about. And then, of course, Dr. Colruyt coming up and talking about professionally delivered to patient empowered and really making us think differently about who's here and what we're doing and the motivation for what we're doing. And then the interoperability asset registry, which I didn't know about, and I thought that was incredible. And then, of course, that took us through what we heard, but then really the work groups that I cannot summarize at all that's going on have been incredibly successful, I think, from the steering committee beyond really what we thought or knew, and that really is because of the audience participation and those here, so thank you.
I think, as you just heard, this has been a great meeting. I think it illustrates what today is MCBK's greatest capability, and that's our ability to convene. This year we brought together people who were here last year and who decided that this is important enough to come back, along with a whole new set of people who added a lot of energy and viewpoints. And it was evident in the working groups, in the demonstrations this year were so interesting and entirely new in their impact. And so what I'd like to do is reflect a little bit on the question for our future. How are we going to harness our shared expertise, this energy that we see here, our convening power, to mobilize computable biomedical knowledge? We think this is important. We all have spent a couple of days of our life here, and probably more because of preparation and so on, because we think it's important. So where do we go from here? How do we build into the future? And I have some mainly questions about that. I think we need to broaden our resource base. And if we're going to do that, we need to build alliances. If we're going to build alliances, I think we have to become clear about our value proposition. What is it that we offer organizations, communities, with which we think it would be good to have an alliance? So think about our potential partners, other allied organizations, especially healthcare organizations, government agencies. Dare we think about the federal government as a potential partner? The research community. Just one of the things that came up in my working group is the tech transfer organizations at our universities. The research libraries, very well represented here. The IT industry, the application developers, the vendors in electronic health records, and on. Well, those are potential partners, but we also have a value proposition, we think, for society at large. We think that the work we're doing is terribly important for medical care providers. Notice the wordle, and patients, right? For public health and individual health. I mean, we spend so much time, because that's where the money is, thinking about care, but the real money is health and having less care. We need to think also, as we learned in our case studies, about applications in education and research. So what resources do we need if we're actually going to increase our impact? Funding? Well, perhaps. Expertise? Do we need more expertise than we currently have? And if so, from where? Influence. A lot of what we're about here is trying to change the world. If we're going to change the world in some kind of a fashion, then we need to be influential with people who would help. And I don't think we thought, outside of the convening effort that we've undertaken, about how we would accomplish that. And of course, what we don't want to do is create competition with potential allies. So we need to think about our niche. We need to think, what do we contribute and what's already being done that's relevant and appropriate and, frankly, we don't need to do? Is there a way that we can coordinate so that rather than having 20 different standards efforts underway, we can bring them together? Or if we can't do the standards thing, can we at least do the interoperation thing? and create an environment in which activities that are built on different standards interoperate freely with one another? Or is our niche, and these are not mutually exclusive, communication, trying to share from one part of our community with another part of the community so we begin to bring this community together with shared knowledge. We already feel that we don't communicate as well within our own organization between the work that our work groups are doing. So how are we going to think about communication? I've often said that people have a very hard time imagining the impact of a new technology until they can see it in action. So do we need to sponsor demonstration applications? The work we had here, seeing the applications, how should we interact with the people who are doing applications development? And should we try to foster applications in critical areas which we think are necessary for the future of MCBK? Do we anticipate that we will be the organizational home for CBK? It's a big question. It's a big responsibility if we decided to take that on. Do we think, if so, that we need to provide infrastructure to support that? And what would that infrastructure be? And what part of that infrastructure would we need to sponsor and provide, and what part would be best done by others? And as I was indicating earlier, how do we promote this idea? How do we gain the political support that's going to be required so that it becomes a fact of our environment as opposed to a dream for our environment? And what resources will be required to do that? And not least, assuming we go down any of these paths, how should we govern ourselves? We're essentially ungoverned now. We're a volunteer organization. We need to remember, of course, that we're only 2 years old, and on the scale of organizational maturity, we're actually moving along relatively quickly. So I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying that at some point we need to start thinking about these issues. In the final analysis, the question I'm asking is, how should we scale the work that we're doing together?
Well, I made the mistake of going last, so I'll do my best. But actually, the nice thing about following these excellent speakers is I don't have to repeat a lot of what they said. So I'm scrolling through my notes here, and I see quite a few of the points that have already been made, so I won't belabor them. I think I agree with absolutely everything that's been said, and it's been very well said. I also just want to applaud the coordinating group and everybody. This has just been a fantastic meeting. I think we've all been really inspired. I agree with what was highlighted in terms of some of the key points that were made too. Perhaps the one I will emphasize again that I took particularly from Deepak's keynote was about the stakeholders that aren't represented and how important that is to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. And you all said that as well. I think that's really critically important, particularly increasingly from the side of the sort of recipients of the benefit of this activity, the patients and people who we ultimately want to affect. So I think that just can't be overstated. I think the review of the feedback, and I think those are our initial slides here, so I'll just quickly, you've got them here, as they continue to come in, really dovetail perfectly with the comments that have already been made and the ones I was thinking about. A lot of the kinds of activities that you all have captured as well, I think, reinforce a lot of the summary, so I'll just leave it up here for you to take a look at. But as I glanced at them, and they continue to evolve, but as I glanced at them, these points you just made, Doug, about where do we fit and how do we align and what sorts of alliances should we be considering? How does this endeavor complement all the other activities that are going on? I'm the chairman of the board of the American Medical Informatics Association, AMIA. There's an organization that clearly a lot of you belong to and that we probably do need to think about sort of how do we connect. I think that would be something I'd be happy to hear from all of you as well in terms of how we could facilitate more of that. I think there's so much work to be done here. This is an effort that I remain committed to because I think it actually is complementary and isn't otherwise being done by anyone else. So I think there's a great need for this, as reflected by all of you being here and all this great work that's been ongoing. But I do think there's value, just to echo what was said and build on it, to understand how do we provide some guidance to the larger community, not just for those of us who have to sometimes make decisions about which of these kinds of things do we get involved in and spend our energy on. How do they complement one another, but also to the stakeholders beyond those of us that are really committed to this kind of activity, to explain why this is valuable in addition to all the other things we're doing. How do we relate to the standards development organizations, to the other professional societies, to the other organizations that are working, and the various folks across the spectrum? I think that can't be overstated either. I had some additional thoughts too in terms of concepts that we've been discussing as our work has continued around the once you start to envision a world where you can achieve the kinds of things that we're working on here, it starts to beg all kinds of additional activities, and it just gets all of us thinking about new approaches for being able to generate evidence. How is the capability of being able to increasingly and in a more sophisticated way mobilize computable biomedical knowledge, then how does that lead us and inform us as to how we need to alter the systems that we're currently working with or the way we're engaging with them? The ability to actually create an evidence-generating environment in addition to bringing evidence to practice is something that I think becomes more and more achievable and even required in order to be able to then track and monitor what the effect is of what we're doing. Leslie mentioned about reproducibility, right? The obvious sort of benefit that an environment that is truly enabled by this kind of activity and these kinds of resources to allow us to really do the things that to date we've struggled to be able to do in terms of bringing evidence to new environments, testing them, validating them, performing the kinds of activities that I've taken to calling algorithmovigilance. It just rolls right off the tongue. The idea that much like pharmacovigilance, you know, we sort of get our drugs out there in the market. We need to know what's happening with them. We have initiatives like Sentinel and methods that have been developed around that and a science around how to do that. And so an evolving scientific discipline around how we take these algorithms and solutions and evidence and knowledge objects and understand what kind of impact that they have in the world. Clearly, the connection to the library community in terms of understanding how to manage and navigate these kinds of artifacts is critical. And then how do we feed that back? How do we modify those? How do we create a true learning system in the schema that we're creating? I think those are just even more exciting opportunities that continue to crystallize as we have these discussions, and they certainly have for me through this meeting. The new opportunities and challenges that come up then in terms of better ways to capture, better ways to be able to have knowledge-informed data and information objects as well. You know, how does this change the nature of what we think of today as electronic health records and increasingly, as we heard from Don Rucker, as our health information increasingly becomes personalized and even mobile, and we're increasingly walking around with it, what are the implications there? How does that change the way that we need to think about interacting? And so these were a lot of the kinds of same ideas that I was having as we were having our discussions today. And then in terms of where we go from here, I think, again, the alliances, again, thinking about it also particularly from the perspective of AMIA and how we connect to exciting communities like this that are really digging into critical issues and enable and benefit from the work, but also be able to contribute back to it. I think that's critical. So I think it's just overall an exciting time to be working on this. I added a couple of slides here just to end on kind of a fun note. I think it is worth taking a look at this too, where you all have indicated that the work is and what you're most excited about. Let's see if I can advance. Oh, that one doesn't want to go forward. Got it there, I think.
Pull those up.
Oh, there it is. All right, go to the next one. So this is me. I wanted to end with this because it's fun. So this is, by the way, this is not, yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. You can't unsee it. This is, this is not, by the way, I want to say at the top here, just because all of us are patients occasionally, I don't think this precludes the need to include patients here too, because I don't think like a patient most of the time, but I was a patient. And so this is me a year and a half ago, where I was about to go into surgery for what was potentially a fatal condition that I had, a very rare disease. And as much as I might look funny there and have a smile on my face, I was pretty scared. So I ended up having a 6-hour procedure to remove a tumor, and it could have killed me. And what I want to mention in 4 slides is what I consider to be an even greater motivator than I had before in terms of needing to address these issues. So it started off just a few months before my operation, where I started to have these really, really severe paroxysms, horrible headaches, worst headache of my life, as well as other symptoms, and you can see them here, profuse sweating, pallor, palpitations, panic, anxiety, all of that, severe hypertension. Went to the emergency department at a highly reputable hospital I won't name, it's in Boston. You've probably heard of it. They didn't make my diagnosis. I was there for 7.5 hours. They discharged me and said, well, it's probably just a really bad migraine, go see a neurologist. So I went back home to Indianapolis, and I went to go see a neurologist, and the neurologist also didn't make the right diagnosis, said, well, I think you have occipital neuralgia, I'm going to give you some injections in the back of your head, and you should feel better. And I said, oh, I don't. And they said, well, give it some time. Went back to the Regenstrief Institute, to Grand Rounds, and had another spell. And a spell sounds nice. These were episodes where I could have had a stroke or an MI, and I could have died, and I felt like I was dying. It was a horrible, horrible feeling, like 10 out of 10. And while I was having that 5th episode in my office, I realized what I had, because thankfully I went to medical school and paid attention that day. And I made my own diagnosis of a pheochromocytoma, which is a very rare adrenal gland tumor that can be fatal. And here it is on the CT. You can see it there. And there's me holding a grapefruit exactly where it is on the right side. And it was about the size of a grapefruit. So I had a 10-centimeter pheochromocytoma. It turns out I presented classically for a very rare disease. But because it's a very rare disease, it wasn't identified, and it often goes undiagnosed. And in fact, half of these are found at autopsy. So I am not suggesting that we revise our healthcare system based on rare diseases, but what I am suggesting is that here is a situation, and not just the actual diagnosis, but other pieces of that I think are informative as to why it is we need to do our work. So I ended up needing to not only make my own diagnosis, but I also ended up needing to then push for quicker workup, determining that it was in fact solitary, thankfully in my case benign and not metastatic, which is what 90% of them are, but 10% can be metastatic. I had to push for treatment. I needed to get on a particular kind of antihypertensive, alpha blockers, otherwise if I had gone on the wrong medication, that could have been fatal. And I needed to get on those soon. So that I didn't have a catastrophic event. I needed to find a great surgeon. There's only 1,000 cases in the US per year, and if you don't go to someone who does a lot of these, you're probably not going to have a good outcome on the table, especially when you have one that's 10 centimeters and adhered to your inferior vena cava like mine was. So I needed to find a really experienced surgeon. And I needed to accelerate my pre-treatment so that I could actually have that operation quickly. All of those things I was able to do because of who I am, not because of the healthcare system. So because of who I am and who I know and my connections, I was able to, and my knowledge, I was able to get a diagnosis, get accelerated care, get a great surgeon, have an excellent outcome, and be standing here with you today, a year and a half later, talking about this as a fun anecdote that informs why it is we need to do this. But the truth of the matter is, if I wasn't who I am, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here today. And that's wrong. That doesn't have to be the case. And it turns out a lot of the work that our community has done and is in the process of doing could have helped if only it were deployed and implemented and used in a way that brought the right knowledge to the right person at the right time to make that decision. And a lot of the kinds of things that I needed and other people need in our healthcare system can and should be facilitated by the kinds of systems that we're working on. So my main point being, this is not just a fun theoretical exercise. There are people that are being harmed today, that are dying, and they don't need to. And everybody should be able to get the kind of care that I got, because every single step along the way where I facilitated my care absolutely could have been enabled and facilitated by having the kinds of mature systems that we are working to develop. So I just wanted to drive that point home. Oh, wait, there's more. There's a tumor selfie, sorry for everybody who had lunch. So yeah, these were the last points I was just making to you now. It didn't have to be this way, but I am very grateful to be here. So that is my last slide. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We'll do great. Thank you. And you can stay. This won't take too long. This has been a really exciting meeting and great discussion and great turnout and people well represented. So we want to thank those that really made this possible. First, the National Library of Medicine and the NIH Nature Center staff. This was a great venue, much better than last year in terms of our ability to communicate and work together, so we appreciate that.
Although we were grateful for the venue last year.
Yes, this doesn't detract from our appreciation last year, but this was great. And the food and all the arrangements were absolutely terrific. And for that, we want to thank the University of Michigan support team, who's listed here, who has just taken care of every detail for the last several months, and it's really just culminated in this great day. So I want to thank that group. You want to thank
Me?
the steering
All right,
committee?
my
Yeah,
turn.
no, take your-
So you saw this slide before. This is the MCBK Steering Committee as it exists today. Doug made, among his many astute comments, Doug, what was the term you used about the governance? You said very light governance. Well, this is the group that is currently providing the light governance, and we are very grateful to them.
Yeah,
And
we'll highlight some are the chairs of our working groups, which
Right.
are also really putting in a great deal of work here.
Right, so what governance we need going forward beyond this is obviously one of the topics that this group will be considering, along with others, as we go forward. So we want to thank the members of the steering committee, and certainly including the working group co-chairs.
Moving forward, we do want to say that we've had part of the support that Michigan has provided us and our volunteers are incredible note-taking and recording of the many great comments and insights that have come forth today, especially considering how many different stakeholders we have represented, how complex and dynamic this issue is that we're dealing with. We've captured notes from all the working groups and the presenters, and these will be posted on the website, mobilizecbk.org. We're also grateful that University of Michigan can continue to support the community as we move forward with some of these action plans. So the working groups have identified some short-term priorities and some starting to work through longer-term visions. And so we've got the Public Resource Hub to put this documentation on, and then we're also have support, which is just vital for communicating between the work groups and sharing that information. And part of our light governance structure and administrative support is to attempt to coordinate these teams. So it was so clear today and yesterday that there are these points of intersection and overlap and synergy across the working groups. And so we are very committed to making this synergy and not duplication and moving it forward. And so we have tried to develop a structure that enables that, and we'll share that information with folks through the working group communication channels as well as the Public Resource Hub.
Yeah, and going back to Doug's comments, Doug posed a lot of questions, and I think there exist in all of our heads, and certainly in mine, a lot of ideas about what the answers might be to many of those questions. How are we going to move to mobilize CBK beyond having a terrific meeting every year? I think we do need a terrific open meeting every year. But I think the question in everybody's mind, I'm sure, is what it is beyond that we are going to do and how we are going to organize to do it. I don't think anybody wants to stay around this afternoon for an extended discussion of that, set of questions, but I think I can assure you all that there will be active dialogue engaging not only the steering committee, but as many of you who wish to be involved in various ways in addressing these questions very soon. That said, there will be a meeting in 2020. There seems to be every reason, at minimum, to have a MCBK meeting about this time of year in 2020, and we will get to work as soon as possible identifying a date so you can put it on your calendars as soon as possible, even if we announced it the week before, I'm sure you all would drop whatever you were doing to come to the meeting. That notwithstanding, we'll try to, yeah, we'll give you a little notice and as much as possible to get it on your calendar. And there are options for location, but there are many, many reasons to believe Washington, D.C. area and the NIH is a very, very appealing place to hold this meeting for a whole bevy of reasons. So there will be a meeting in 2020. It will not be the only thing MCBK does, but those other things remain open for discussion in addition to what the work group, and of course it's certain that the work groups will move forward with their agenda.
Right, exactly, and we're open to comment and feedback on how this went and how we might make the next meeting even more productive. So I would suggest engage with the work groups that you have today. You can watch additional work groups, and through those channels, communicate your ideas, and then there's a structure of the working group to sort of feed into the planning committee for the next meeting. So you really can have a voice in what this next meeting looks like and in all of our interim activities and our quest towards the future. So,
Do any of our panelists want to add anything before?
That was a great summary and charge. I feel incredibly inspired for moving forward. So, and thanks to all our presenters and those that participated. You're the hardcore followers here that made it to the last session. So we appreciate that and all the time that you've given to this, and we'll continue to move forward. So
So thank you. Safe travels home.